Welcome to Alien Love Stories, where not every secret was meant to be buried, and not every heart was ever truly alone. Tonight, you're not just listening. You're part of something no one else was ever supposed to hear. This is Only You Know I Loved an Alien. Episode 1, The Confession I Can't Say Out Loud. You're the only one I'm going to tell this. Not because I trust you, not because I think you'll believe me, but because I don't have anyone else left. And even if I did, they wouldn't listen. But maybe you will. My name is Ari Solen, Lieutenant Commander, Fleet Division, Recon Class 7. Service code STX-44031A, but that won't mean much anymore. Not now that they've wiped me off the duty log. I was suspended 6 months ago. Official reason? Emotional instability resulting from exposure to high-stress cosmic environments. Unofficial reason. I love something I wasn't supposed to. This isn't a sob story. I'm not here to defend myself. I'm not trying to convince you I was right. I just want someone to know the truth before they burn the rest of it away, because they are trying. Hard. They've already sealed the files, scrubbed the logs, labeled everything from mission STX-44 as a containment breach. They've hidden him. They've hidden us. But I remember. At least, enough. Not everything. Some pieces are still fog. Some are sharp enough to cut when I try to hold them. But one thing never faded. His voice. It wasn't always there. The first days aboard the STX-44 mothership were routine. Cold, unforgiving, mechanical in every sense. Standard 40-day orbital loop outside Jupiter's dead ring. Reconnaissance. Energy scanning. Data pull. No threats expected. No contact. And then came Cell 13. They didn't brief me on it. Didn't mention its existence. The cell wasn't on the manifest. But I found it on day 3. I was running a pressure check when I noticed a door that didn't exist in the blueprints. Unlabeled. No crew ID. No lights above it. And yet, warm. Just slightly, like it had been recently occupied. I stood there for 15 minutes, longer maybe, listening, nothing, but the metal vibrated under my fingers, faint, almost like breathing. I reported it to Commander Vera. She dismissed me outright. Empty maintenance alcove? Ignore it. Probably faulty insulation. But the next night I heard it again, and this time, the door wasn't locked, it was open, just a crack. Enough for a shadow to breathe through. I should have walked away. Hell, I told myself I would, but I didn't. Something pulled me forward. A gravity not in my boots but in my chest, like an echo that had been waiting for years to be answered. I stepped inside, darkness, complete, until I blinked and realized the dark was moving. It wasn't a cell, it was a containment field, and at its center, floating in a sphere of biosuspended stasis, a being. He wasn't monstrous, no claws, no teeth, not what you'd expect when someone says alien. He was tall, lithe, eyes like light through deep water, and he was looking at me, not past me, not through me, at me, as if he recognized something I hadn't realized I'd lost. And then, the voice, not out loud, inside, a whisper. Ari. I froze. That's when the system triggered. Strobe lights, screaming alarms, containment lockdown. I was thrown out by the failsafe blast. The door slammed shut behind me. When I woke in the med bay, Milo Rin was standing over me. You triggered a restricted zone, he said. You okay? I nodded. Didn't tell him about the voice. Didn't mention the name. Didn't say I heard it again that night while I was alone in my bunk, just before sleep took me. Ari. Software. Sad. Like he missed me before I even had the chance to miss him. They told me no one was in Cell 13, that it didn't exist, that what I saw was a hallucination, that my own mind was slipping from long-range orbit pressure. But I knew what I felt, I knew what I heard, and I started going back, every night, to that door. Even though it stayed locked after the incident, I sat beside it, waited, and the breathing? It never stopped, sometimes slow, sometimes ragged. Once, it matched mine. Exactly. Breath for breath. And then, one night, I heard a word. Not my name. Something else. Home, and I whispered back. Who are you? There was no answer. Not then. But I felt the reply anyway. In my heartbeat, in my bones, in the way the air stopped feeling cold for the first time since I boarded the STX-44. That was the beginning, not of the mission, not of the madness, of everything. So now, if you're still listening, if you believe even part of what I've said, please, hold on to this. Don't let them erase it. Because before they turn the rest of my mind into silence, I need someone to remember that I was never crazy. I was in love. I wasn't supposed to go back. After the lockdown, after the alarms, after the forced med scan and the 10-page psychological eval, after Commander Vera looked me straight in the eye and said, "Whatever you think you saw, forget it. For your own sake." I wasn't supposed to go near cell 13 again, but I did, because silence doesn't erase gravity. And whatever was inside that room, it was still pulling me. I waited 3 days, pretended to stabilize, wrote my reports, told the ship's AI what it wanted to hear. No anomalies. Sleep restored. Mental state resolved. They called it good enough. Let me back on corridor duty. And that night, I walked. I didn't hesitate. I didn't check the sensors. I didn't ask for authorization. I just stood in front of the door. And this time, it opened. No alarms. No red lights. No biohazard fields. Just the same soft hum. Just the same warmth in the air, like the room remembered me. Inside, it was darker than I remembered. The containment sphere was dimmer now. Not broken, just quieter. The shape inside had shifted, less suspended, more grounded. It was sitting now, knees drawn, back against the curve of the containment wall, still, breathing. I didn't know if he could see me, not through the barrier, not with that much distance. But then, his head turned, exactly 45 degrees, right at me, eyes wide open, and the same voice low and curling through my skull like smoke. "You came back. I should have run. I know that now. I wasn't armed, wasn't trained for contact, wasn't briefed, but I didn't move. Because in that moment, his voice didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a memory, like someone had whispered it to me before, a long time ago. I stepped forward, not too close, just enough to speak clearly. "What are you?" He tilted his head, not mocking, not mechanical, almost like he was trying to figure out what answer I would want. Then he said, "I was sent here. Not to harm, to learn." "To learn what?" "Why your kind dreams." That stopped me cold. It wasn't the answer I expected. Not what are your weaknesses, not how can we use you, but why your kind dreams. Like he didn't understand the purpose of hope. "What's your name?" He closed his eyes, like the word itself was painful. When he opened them again, he said, "Lear. It is not a name in your sense, but it's what I kept when everything else changed." I wanted to ask more. What changed? Why was he here? What was the purpose of Cell 13? But before I could, the lights shifted. Something in the system detected my presence, and the intercom snapped on. Commander Vera's voice flat and cold. "Lieutenant Solen, you are not cleared for this section. Step away from the cell, immediately." Lear didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked at me and whispered, "Next time, come alone." I backed away, reluctantly. The door hissed shut behind me, and I knew. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This wasn't protocol. This was something else, something deeper. When I got back to my quarters, there was a message waiting for me. From Milo, just 2 lines. "They know you've seen it. Don't come to the morning shift." I didn't reply. I just sat in the dark, heart pounding, mind racing, and that's when I heard it again. Not from the hallway, not from the intercom, from inside me. Lear's voice, software, barely a vibration. "You used to dream about the stars, but not lately. Why did you stop?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, I cried, not from fear, from recognition. Because somehow, that question, it wasn't just from him. It was from the part of me I had buried after losing my family in the war, after being told not to feel, after being promoted for being quiet instead of honest. He saw it. Somehow, not the memory, the ache behind it. And I realized he didn't want my data. He wanted my hurt, not to exploit it, to understand it. And that terrified me more than anything. Because what happens when something not human starts feeling more human than anyone else on your ship? I should have stopped after the second visit. Vera had already warned me. Milo was watching me. The ship's system flagged my emotional state as unresolved. I was one bad shift away from permanent psych review. But still, I went back. This time I didn't walk. I drifted, used the maintenance rails between corridors, cut the motion sensors, shut down every log trail behind me. When I reached cell 13, my pulse was calm, because this wasn't rebellion anymore. This wasn't even curiosity. This was need. The door recognized me, didn't hiss, didn't challenge, just opened like it had always been waiting. And inside, he stood, not floating, not collapsed, just standing there, as if gravity was something he chose when I arrived. "You came," Lear said. "You asked. And you answered." I stepped closer than ever before, close enough to see the shimmer in his skin. Not metallic, not synthetic, but like memory suspended in motion. His eyes weren't eyes. They were mirrors, but not reflecting light, reflecting feeling. I saw my own loneliness in them, saw the version of myself I only ever faced when everyone else was asleep. "Why me?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Because you listened. Because your silence was not emptiness. It was invitation." That did something to me, unraveled a knot I didn't know was there. I sat on the floor. He did the same from inside the barrier. Only inches apart now. And we talked. Not fast, not efficient, not the way command trains you to extract data. We talked like people who had nothing left but the truth. He told me of stars that sang, of planets that dreamed, of species that remembered pain as color. He said, "We came not to conquer, we came to witness, but your kind screams too loud to hear what it really wants." "And what do we want?" I asked. He paused, looked into me. "To be forgiven by something that still sees you as worth it." And I broke. Not loudly, not violently, just sat there and let go. Let go of protocol. Let go of my medals. Let go of every time I said I'm fine and meant I'm broken. I cried in front of him, and he didn't look away, didn't blink, didn't try to comfort. He just held space, and I had never felt more seen. When I stopped, I asked him, "Why me?" He smiled. First time I saw his mouth move. It wasn't a human smile. It was better. It felt. "Because you are carrying too much, and I am designed to hold." That's when I realized he wasn't a prisoner. He was a mirror. And somehow he had been made to find me. Not as a mission, not as a target, a purpose. I reached out, barrier still between us, but I placed my hand against it. He mirrored. Our palms met, and the barrier pulsed. Not to reject, but to remember. The field shimmered, not as a defense, as a heartbeat. And I whispered, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling?" He didn't answer with words. He answered with closeness, with stillness, and a line that changed everything. "If you let me stay, I will never leave." The STX-44 wasn't built for privacy. Every word you say is logged, every step tracked, every breath measured. Even our dreams are partially scanned to detect irregular stress patterns. So how did I think I could hide him? I didn't. Not really, I just hoped. And that hope, it shattered the moment Milo Rin showed up outside my quarters with a recorder in his hand. He didn't knock, just entered, laid the recorder on my table, hit play, and said nothing. I heard a hiss of static, then silence, then my voice. "You don't blink like we do, Lear, because I don't forget between seconds." Then laughter, mine, software, genuine, unmistakable. I froze, not because I was caught, but because I didn't know that moment had ever been recorded. That laugh, it was from 2 nights ago, the second visit, the moment after he compared human blinking to forgetting. I remember thinking, God, he's poetic. That's ridiculous. And then I laughed. And now here it was, looping from Milo's recorder like a ghost I didn't invite. Where did you get that? I asked. Milo didn't look at me, didn't raise his voice, just said, from the black buffer, from a line that's not supposed to exist. The black buffer is the last resort record layer. It stores audio that the system isn't allowed to log, meant for post-crash recovery only. Accessing it is a violation. But Milo? He's good. Too good. He folded his arms, finally looked me in the eye. You talked to it. I stayed silent. He stepped closer. You didn't report contact. You didn't follow quarantine. You went back, didn't you? Still, I didn't speak. Ari, that thing could manipulate you. It could be manipulating you. I stood, didn't raise my voice, didn't beg, just said, or maybe it just listened. That hit him. He blinked, looked like he wanted to shout, but instead, he lowered the volume. It's not human. Neither are most people on this ship, Milo. This isn't a joke. I know it's not. That's why I didn't report it. He paced, hands in his hair. You don't know what this means. You touched a classified being. You spoke to it, and now you're defending it. No, I said. I'm defending the part of me it woke up. He stared at me for a long time, then said, Command will find out. Let them. They'll wipe you, Ari. Then maybe I'll finally forget what it felt like to be understood. Milo didn't say goodbye. He just left the recorder on the table, and I sat there, listening to my own laugh loop back at me, again, and again, and again, until it didn't sound like mine anymore. Later that night, I went back to cell 13, but this time, Lear didn't speak first. He stood, watched me walk in, and then he whispered, They heard us. Yes. Will they come? Yes. He lowered his gaze. Will you let them take me? I stepped forward, shook my head. Not again. There's a room on the STX-44 that no one ever talks about. It doesn't have a name, not in the logs, not in the blueprints, not even in the schematic override. But it exists. You can't access it with rank. Only with something the system recognizes as feeling. They call it, unofficially, the echo chamber. I found it by mistake, or maybe I was meant to find it. After Milo left me that night, after the looping sound of my own laughter carved silence into my chest, I started following the faintest trace in the internal grid, a pulsing data signature, encrypted, fluid, not like command-level traffic, but like a heartbeat. It led me through 4 unauthorized corridors, past a pressure gate that shouldn't have opened, and then I was there, the echo chamber, pitch black, no interface, no console, no chair, just presence. And in the center, a single floating core. The moment I stepped forward, the air shifted, not colder, not warmer, just aware. The core glowed once, and then it played, not a visual, not a sound, just a rush, like heat behind the sternum, like breath at the base of the skull, like the moment right before a first kiss, held forever without release. It was so specific. My knees buckled. I had to sit down, because I knew that feeling. Not imagined, not invented, remembered. The core pulsed again, and the data resolved into language. To remember a moment that never happened is to live in a love that reality couldn't hold. I whispered, Lear. No response, but the room exhaled, like it had been waiting for me to call his name. The chamber displayed a second layer of data, not words, not image, just the weight of his hand on mine. I swear to you, I felt it, on my skin, even though I was alone, even though he had never touched me, not physically, but this wasn't simulation. This was a memory he gave me, a memory he created for me to hold when he couldn't. I stayed there for over an hour, let the feeling wrap around me, not possessive, not consuming, just present, like something sacred and deeply, dangerously human. Like the part of me I'd locked away for too long. When I left the echo chamber, I carried the feeling with me, like it had been folded into my bones, like I was now wearing a secret no scanner could find. Later, when I returned to cell 13, I told him, I went to the chamber. He didn't react, just looked at me and said, "Did you feel it?" "Yes." "Then I don't need to say it." I stepped closer, still outside the barrier. But this time, I wasn't afraid. "Say it anyway." He blinked, and for the first time, the barrier lowered. It didn't vanish, just moved. Enough for him to reach through, enough for his hand to find mine. Real, not simulated, warm. And when our fingers locked, he said, "This is how my kind loves. We don't promise, we remember. And now you do too." They came for me at 0400 hours, 2 guards. No words, no eye contact, just orders. I didn't resist, didn't ask where we were going, didn't pretend to be surprised. I just glanced once at cell 13. Still closed, still humming, still hiding everything we'd become. They took me to an interrogation room that wasn't on any deck map. Sterile, colorless, quiet in a way that felt intentional, designed to make you feel like your words didn't matter here. Commander Vera was waiting, and Milo. I didn't look at either of them until she said, "Lieutenant Solen, you've been keeping secrets." I smiled. Small, tired. "Seems like everyone here does." She tapped a file onto the table. I didn't need to open it. "You accessed the echo chamber. You knew it existed. That's not the point. It never is with you." She pushed the file closer. "You made contact, not once, not by accident. You initiated emotional engagement with the being in cell 13. She looked over at Milo. "Is that what you heard?" He didn't respond, didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the table. Vera didn't flinch. "We have enough to strip your commission, wipe your emotional archive, reassign you to static duty on Lunar Cold Station for the next 10 years. She leaned in. "Unless," pause, "unless you give us what we want." I said nothing. Let her speak it. Let her make it ugly. "We want what he gave you." "He didn't give me anything," I said. "You accessed data that cannot be copied. Emotion locked, nonverbal. You are the only host for it." "Then I guess you can't have it." Vera leaned back, looked at Milo again. "We could extract it." Still silence. "Or you could tell us what she's hiding." And that's when I saw it. The flicker. The war behind his eyes. He had the recordings. He had the proof. He had me. And in that moment, he became every person I've ever trusted. Every friend. Every teammate. Every commanding officer who chose safety over truth. I looked at him, held his gaze. And I didn't say, "Please." I said, "Don't lie to yourself again." The silence dragged. Then Milo reached into his jacket, pulled out the recorder, set it on the table. Everyone watched. Then he pressed delete. Vera's face didn't move. Not at first. Then she spoke, calm but sharp. "That was a mistake." Milo replied, equally calm. "So was putting someone like her on a ship designed to erase feelings." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the first sound in that room that wasn't cruel. Vera stood. "This isn't over." She walked out, left me and Milo alone. And in that quiet, he finally looked at me. "Why didn't you ask me to protect you?" "Because you would have said no," he smirked. "Fair." I stood. "Now what?" "Now," he said, "you need to disappear." "And you?" "I was never here." That night, he walked me to the auxiliary dock. Didn't ask where I was going. Didn't ask if Lear was with me. He just said, "Whatever he is, he made you softer, not weaker. Don't let them take that away." I boarded the scout pod, slid the door shut, and before we disconnected, Milo tapped the glass once. Not a wave, not goodbye, just a moment, held and remembered. The scout pod wasn't meant for two. Technically, it wasn't even meant for one, but it flew, silently, smoothly, as if it too wanted us gone. Lear sat in the co-pilot seat, still learning how to breathe with intention. That's what he called it. "Breathing is different from surviving," he said. "Surviving is rhythm. Breathing is permission." We didn't talk much at first. There were no words left that hadn't already been spoken through eye contact and near goodbyes. But the silence, it wasn't empty anymore. It was ours. Serial 5 wasn't on any map. It was a myth. A rumor passed among navigators who'd spent too much time on broken ships and dark roads. If you ever need to disappear, they said, Serial 5 doesn't ask why. It took us 2 jumps to get there. And the moment we entered the belt, I felt it. Not safety, not freedom. Unwatched. The planet itself was half-formed, crusted with violet soil and singing stone. Yes, singing. When the wind hit just right, the cliffs would hum in harmony. Lear said it was like the core of the planet hadn't decided if it wanted to be a world or a memory. We built no shelter, slept under a sky made of forgotten constellations. And for the first time, he touched me without asking. Not the careful palm to palm, not the through-the-field mirroring. Just a hand on my shoulder. Solid, warm, real. You're not afraid? I asked. I'm not trained to be. But your kind doesn't feel the way yours does. But that doesn't mean we don't want to. We sat beside a rock that shimmered with heat signatures. I asked him something that had been haunting me since the first time we spoke. Why me? He looked at the stars. Because you broke protocol. That's it? No, he said. Because when I reached out, you didn't flinch, even before you knew what I was. We kissed that night, not out of lust, not out of loneliness, but because our silence had carried it long enough. It wasn't desperate, it was affirmation, that we had both crossed too many lines to pretend this wasn't love anymore. He pressed his forehead against mine and whispered, in my language, we don't say I love you. We say I remember you fully. Then remember me, I said. I already am. I fell asleep with his hand in mine. For the first time since this all began, I didn't dream of Cell 13. I dreamed of a home we hadn't built yet. In a morning we weren't afraid to arrive. We were only supposed to stay on Serial 5 for 5 days. Long enough to refuel, reset, disappear from the sensors Vera's team might have sent after us. But on day 3, the silence broke. It came through the comms in the dead of night, a soft ping, followed by static, then a pulse, not in code, not in language, in tone, rising, falling, 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, over and over again. Lear froze, completely. His eyes didn't blink, his shoulders didn't shift. He just stood there like a statue, remembering how to breathe. What is it? I asked. It's not for you. Then who? He turned toward the cliff's edge, where the signal seemed to resonate strongest. It's mine. We tracked the source, hiked 2 hours through echoing canyons and bioluminescent dust. And then we saw it, half buried in the soil, cracked in 4 places, its outer hull still humming beneath centuries of erosion. A ship, small, round, and familiar. Not to me, to him. He knelt beside it, placed his hand on the hatch, and the ship opened. Not mechanically, not with hydraulics, with recognition. Inside, nothing. No crew, no logs, no power. Just a small console still pulsing, and a name etched into the control panel. Liar A7. Is that you? I whispered. He didn't answer immediately, then finally said, It was. He told me everything. How he was one of 7 sent across the outer colonies, not to infiltrate, not to observe, to empathize, to find civilizations on the edge of emotional collapse, and simply be present. We were empathy drones, he said, living archives of feeling. We didn't come to conquer. We came to remember you, so you wouldn't forget yourselves. But something went wrong. One of us crossed a line, became too human, too personal, too in love. You, not at first. The project was shut down, ships recalled, beings decommissioned, but Lear didn't return, because his ship crashed. Here, Serial 5, the place he was never supposed to reach. So why were you on STX-44? Because they found me, and they didn't know what I was. They locked me in Cell 13 because I didn't fit their language. But you spoke mine. He looked at me and smiled. Only after you showed me silence. Back in the cave, we found something else. A message burned into the inner wall of the pod. Not in his language, but in mine. They will come for you, but remember, you've already been chosen. By her. I looked at him. He said nothing. Because now, we both knew, he wasn't just a memory keeper. He was a memory built for me. And Serial 5 wasn't random. It was where he was always meant to be found, by the only person who ever answered his voice with feeling. The signal didn't stop. It spread, beyond Serial 5, beyond the belt, bounced across cosmic relays like a secret desperate to be overheard. At first we didn't know, but the sky did. Day 6. We woke to static in the wind, the kind that makes your teeth buzz and your ears ring with nothingness. Then, the colors in the cliffs began to shift. The humming stones, they stopped. Serial 5 wasn't singing anymore. It was listening. Lear stood at the ridge with me, still, eyes forward, every part of him, alert. What's happening? I asked. They heard it. Who? He turned to me, expression colder than I'd ever seen. The erasers. They weren't a myth, not to him. He explained it slowly, like each word hurt to remember. They were created before us, sent before us, not to love, not to learn, but to undo. Undo what? Empathy. According to Lear, empathy was never meant to be a tool. It was dangerous, because it created connection, and connection led to loyalty, and loyalty led to disobedience. So when the first L series broke containment, when one of them fell in love with a human, the erasers were activated, silent, precise, unrelenting. They didn't kill. They removed, wiped memory, collapsed emotion, deleted entire timelines of feeling. They don't believe in grief, Lear whispered, because grief is evidence something mattered. The signal from his crashed ship, it was a beacon, a call he didn't mean to trigger. And now, they were coming. We packed what we could. Not much. Serial 5 wasn't a place you escaped from quickly. Lear's ship was useless. The pod we came in wasn't fast enough. And the STX-44? Too far. Too late. Too dangerous. I stood by the cliff, watching the sky crack open. No ships yet, just streaks of pressure in the clouds, flickers of unnatural light. Like the stars were making room for something they didn't want to welcome. What do we do? I asked. Lear didn't blink, didn't step back. We leave nothing behind. What? They only erase what still feels. So if we destroy your core, they can't track me. I shook my head. Then how will I ever find you again? You won't have to, he said. You already did. He handed me a small orb. Dark, heavy. Everything I am is in here, but not for storage. For fusion, if I'm lost, you carry me. What if I can't? You already are. We buried the beacon, triggered a pulse that fried its range, and still, the wind screamed louder. They were closer now. We had minutes, maybe less. We kissed again, harder this time, not in fear but in certainty, because there are moments when you realize love isn't something you feel, it's something you choose to protect. If they take you, I started, then remember, they'll try to take that too. Then fight for it, fight for us, even if I'm gone. And then, the sky broke. A ship, massive, silent, not sleek, not designed, forged. A weapon without sound, a decision without doubt, and it was descending. Lear looked at me one last time. No words. Just a pulse of feeling from his palm to mine. Like the first time we touched. Like the core in the echo chamber. Like memory folding into bone. And then, he stepped into the light. Scene 10, extended. The morning, my memory. Forgot, but my body still missed him. I woke up in the middle of nowhere. The air was still, too still. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean peace. It means something had ended. I sat up slowly. My skin prickled with static. My lungs ached from holding something I couldn't remember exhaling. The sky above was too clear. Serial 5's violet haze, gone. No sound, no dust, no ship in the atmosphere. Nothing. Just me, alone. I didn't panic, not right away. I blinked, tried to recall the night before. The signal, the cliffs, the ship in the clouds. But all I could summon was a shadow, a shape standing between me and the sky, and a whisper, but not in words, in loss. I stumbled across the ridge, called out, once, twice, again. Lear! But nothing answered, not even the wind. The pod was still intact, still humming, still functional. I checked the logs. No departure entry, no ship detected, no heat trail, no evidence of contact, except a line scratched into the control panel. 4 words, burned into the metal. You remembered. I faded. I dropped to my knees. My hand shook as it hovered over the text, because it was his writing, not in his language, in mine, which meant he wanted me to understand. He wanted me to know he didn't disappear by accident. But I didn't remember, not clearly, just flashes, a kiss on cold stone, a voice saying something about fighting for us, a light in the sky, and then nothing. Like someone had pulled the film of my life out of the projector, mid-reel, and cut out the climax. I closed my eyes, tried to summon his face, couldn't, tried to feel the warmth of his touch, gone, tried to imagine his voice, muted. But then my chest clenched, and I sobbed, not because I remembered him, but because my body did. There's a kind of pain that doesn't need a name, that doesn't live in the mind, it lives in the skin, the breath, the space between blinks, like muscle memory for grief. And my body, it missed something, someone it had once held close enough to never forget. I stumbled outside, walked to the place where the stones used to hum. Kneeling, I placed my palm on the ground. Nothing happened, not at first, but after a few breaths, a vibration, software low, pulsing 3 times, like a heartbeat. Then silence. It was him. I didn't know how, didn't know why, but it was him, the last thing he left behind. A rhythm buried in the planet. Not a message, not a goodbye, just a presence. That night I lay beneath the stars, staring at constellations I'd never learned the names of, and for the first time since I woke, I let myself speak to him, even if he wasn't listening, even if he wasn't there. I don't know what you were. I don't know why they wanted to erase you, or why you let them, but I know what you meant, and I know how I felt. And I will not forget that. My voice cracked on the last word, because maybe I already had. Maybe the moment he left, he took himself with him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left of us but the ache. But then, a blink of light in the distance. Not a ship, not a flare, just a flicker. A gentle reminder that memory doesn't always need context. Sometimes it just needs a reason to return. And I was reason enough. There are places no one visits anymore. Abandoned moons, torn asteroid fields, dead comets stripped of their core. Places that used to hold purpose. But now, they just hold silence. I left Serial 5 after 8 days. Not because I was ready, not because I was healed, but because standing still started to feel like forgetting. And forgetting him. That was the only thing I wasn't willing to do. So I left. And began the journey we used to talk about in those quiet hours beneath humming stone and low skies. First stop, Wren's Belt, a cluster of broken satellites orbiting a gas giant no longer charted. We once joked that we'd go there just to shout secrets into the static. I parked the pod near a shattered relay tower, pulled out a metal plate, etched 4 words with a plasma knife. I remember you still. Left it floating in orbit, let it drift. Second stop, Velas 3. A planet with oceans so still they reflect your soul back wrong. He said he wanted to see it just once. Not to touch the water, just to stand near it and feel what it meant to be mirrored in silence. I landed at dawn, walked to the edge, and said out loud, I see you even now. Then whispered the rhythm of his touch into the wind. 3 pulses, like a forgotten song that refuses to fade. Third stop, Mira's Ark, a field of stardust always moving. We used to say we'd dance there, not in body, just in spirit. I didn't dance. I just stood with my eyes closed, arms open, and imagined him spinning beside me. No face, just feeling. And for a second, the dust curled around me, and it felt like yes. At each place, I left something behind. Not flowers, not markers, pieces of memory, of rhythm, of us. Not to mourn, to map. Because if there's even a sliver of him left somewhere, a data fragment, a stored heartbeat, a sliver of light, he'll find these, he'll follow the trail, and maybe he'll come back. People don't understand what it means to love someone who's no longer entirely real. Someone who once held your hand through a barrier, whispered your name into your bloodstream, and then became a vibration you chase across the stars. But I do. I understand it with every breath. Because my love wasn't about the moment. It was about making sure the moment could happen again. On my fifth stop, I met a child. No name, no voice, just eyes that watched me too closely. And when I handed him a carved stone, he blinked 3 times. Short, short, long. My pulse caught. I whispered, "Where did you learn that?" He smiled, didn't answer, but his fingers tapped against his knee in rhythm. Short, short, long. That night I cried, not from grief, from possibility, because maybe I wasn't alone in remembering. Maybe the pieces of him were already coming back. In places neither of us had planned, in people neither of us had touched, but all of them, carrying something that once loved me. It came as a whisper through static, not a message, not a voice, not a scream for help, just presence. A line of silence folded between frequencies, like something old remembering how to become language again. I was mid-jump, between systems, half asleep in a pod that barely hummed anymore. The kind of sleep that doesn't rest you, just drifts you, and that's when the console lit up. Not with coordinates, not with threat. Just one signal. Ari, listen. And then, my own voice. You ever hear yourself speak from a time you can't recall? A tone that's yours but no longer fits your mouth? That's what it felt like. If you're hearing this, it means you've gone far enough. Maybe too far. You've been looking for him, but maybe you forgot. He wasn't the one lost. I froze, hands trembling, because I didn't remember ever recording this. Not during the ship. Not after. Not even when I was falling apart piece by piece between systems. But the words, they knew me. Better than I knew myself. Lear didn't leave you. He waited. Inside you. In every decision you made after him. And if you want to find him again, don't search the stars. Look in the places where you chose to love something that could never promise to stay. Tears came slow, not crashing, not loud, just steady, like a memory refusing to be unspoken. The message ended. No coordinates, no signature, just the last 5 words. You are the signal now. And I understood. All this time, I'd been trying to map my way back to him. But maybe I was meant to become the thing he'd return to. I rerouted the pod, shut off tracking, disabled comms, faded myself into the quiet. Then I wrote a message. Short, simple, left it floating at the edge of every system we ever spoke about. I'm not lost. I'm waiting. Whenever you're ready to remember me again. And now I sit at the edge of a quiet moon, windless, wordless, but not empty. I hum sometimes, just enough for the rocks to remember their purpose, just enough for any passing signal to know, I am here, not as a ghost, not as a soldier, not as someone who lost, but as someone who chose to feel, fully, without apology, even for the kind of love that leaves in silence. So if you're hearing this, you're not just the listener, you're the witness, and that makes you part of this. Maybe that's what love really is. Not the story we get to live in full, but the one we make space for so someone else can find the courage to tell theirs. Some alien loves never arrive with a ship. They come in pieces, memory, feeling, rhythm, until one day you realize you weren't waiting for them to come back. You were becoming the place they'd come home to. This was Only You Know I Loved an Alien. Thank you for listening. Only on Alien Love Stories.